Welcome back to Spirits in the Shadow, everyone. What I'm about to share is based on a viral story about true events that happened during my time in Korea. It all started in my small office apartment in the Gongdeok district of Seoul. One night, a strange dripping sound broke the silence. An unused towel became soaked and dripped onto the floor. Then a chilling smell filled the room. My grandmother's old shampoo mixed with stagnant water. This was just the beginning of the horror. Stay tuned to my channel to find out what happened next and why the locals never mentioned the reservoir. My name is Ji-hoon, and I am, for all intents and purposes, a ghost who haunts the archives of a small university in Mapo. My official title is Research Assistant, a designation that sounds far more distinguished than the reality of my existence. Life in Seoul had worn my edges smooth, polishing me down into a functional, forgettable shape. The days were long, bleeding into nights under the cold, fluorescent hum of the library basement. My world was a landscape of brittle paper and the faint, sweet smell of decaying books. I was 28, but I felt ancient. My purpose was simple: to assist Professor Lee, a man whose passion for obscure historical minutiae was matched only by his obliviousness to the passage of time. My work involved cross-referencing land grants from the late Joseon dynasty, a task so profoundly dull it felt like a form of meditation, emptying my mind of everything but dates and names that had long since turned to dust. Dinner was rarely a meal, it was a refueling. I'd stand in a brightly lit convenience store, wedged between a shelf of instant noodles and a rack of energy drinks, swallowing a triangle kimbap in 3 bites before heading back to the archives. The city's vibrant, relentless energy was a spectacle I watched from behind glass. The bustling streets of Hongdae, the laughter spilling from barbecue restaurants, the couples walking hand in hand along the Han River. It was a life happening to other people. My own was a loop of work, eat, sleep, repeat. This was my normal, a relatable urban solitude that countless others in the city shared. It was a life I desperately needed a break from. The escape came in the form of an unexpected email from a different professor, an old mentor from my undergraduate days named Dr. Park. He was working on a small, self-funded project, a collection of oral histories about folk customs in the more remote mountain provinces. His usual assistant had fallen ill, and he remembered my meticulous note-taking. He needed someone to accompany him for a few weeks to a town called Dosan to help conduct and record interviews. The pay was modest, barely enough to cover my rent, but the offer included lodging and a train ticket. More importantly, it was a ticket out of Seoul. I replied yes within minutes. The thought of trading the city's concrete canyons for actual mountains, of breathing air that didn't taste of exhaust fumes, felt like a lifeline. It was a simple purpose, a temporary work trip. But for me, it felt like a pilgrimage. The journey itself was a process of shedding layers. The KTX train slipped out of Seoul Station with a futuristic whisper, blurring the urban sprawl into a smear of grey and glass. We travelled for hours, the landscape gradually softening from steel to green. Then we switched to a local bus at a sleepy provincial station. The bus was old, its engine groaning with a rattling persistence as it wound its way up steep mountain roads. With every kilometre, it felt like we were travelling not just through space, but through time. Dosan was nestled in a valley, a town that seemed to have been passed over by the 21st century. It was a strange collage of decades, as if it were pieced together from forgotten memories. The architecture was a mix of the stark, functional concrete buildings of the 1970s and the faded, peeling pastels of the 1990s. An old-fashioned barbershop pole spun its red and blue stripes next to a shuttered DVD rental store. There was no PC bang, no trendy coffee shop, just a few family-run restaurants and a general store with a sun-bleached sign. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. Our lodging was a hanok, a traditional Korean house at the very edge of the village where the forest began to encroach. The owner, a widow in her late 60s, greeted us with a silent bow. Her face was a road map of wrinkles, but her movements were precise and deliberate. She showed us to our rooms, which smelled of old wood and clean linen. As Dr. Park began unpacking his recording equipment, I stood by the open doorway, looking out at the cobbled courtyard. The widow emerged from the main house, carrying two small, identical ceramic bowls. She moved to the wooden threshold of the main gate that led out of the property. With practiced care, she placed one bowl on the left side of the entrance and the other on the right. I saw that they were filled to the brim with coarse, white salt. After setting them down, she stood back, brought her hands together, and clapped softly, once. It was not a clap of applause or greeting. It was sharp, definitive, as if she were marking a boundary or settling an unseen arrangement. She looked at the salt, then at the empty space beyond the gate, and gave a slow, deliberate nod before turning and disappearing back into the house. I watched her go, a strange chill prickling my skin despite the mild afternoon air. It was a simple, quiet gesture, but it felt ancient and heavy with a meaning I couldn't begin to understand. It was the first sign that the customs we had come here to study were not just relics of the past. The local man had spoken of it with a casualness that felt unnerving in retrospect. A detour, he'd called it, a simple mountain path leading to the old reservoir. It was this casualness that I clung to as I walked the path alone. The abandoned bus stop, my starting point, should have been the first warning. Its sign was a ghost of faded blue, the wooden bench beside it missing a single slat, like a broken tooth in a skull's grin. This small, unsettling detail, a place of transit now frozen in decay, marked a clear boundary. I told myself it was just forgotten infrastructure, a common sight in rural areas. But the audience senses it's a warning, a threshold being crossed from a world of schedules and destinations to one of stasis and silence. The asphalt road seemed to agree, crumbling into a damp, dark earth track that swallowed the sound of my footsteps, pulling me deeper into the woods. When the reservoir finally appeared, it was a sudden, stark slash in the dense green. It wasn't a natural lake, but a man-made scar. A low concrete lip forming a perfect unnatural circle, bordered by a new-looking chain-link fence. The gate was secured with a heavy, fresh padlock. The water itself was the most unsettling part. A sheet of black glass, so perfectly still and dark it didn't seem to reflect the grey sky but absorb it. Drawn to the concrete edge, I noticed another small, unsettling detail. A small, deliberate arrangement on the ground. A cheap plastic comb. A simple hair tie. A small, torn packet of salt. Beside them lay 3 white chrysanthemums, their petals just beginning to turn translucent at the edges. My character ignores and rationalizes it, immediately seeking a mundane explanation. Teenagers, I thought, a weird picnic spot, or maybe some local tradition, a good luck offering before a swim. I dismissed it as a cultural clutter, the kind of insignificant debris one finds in forgotten places. But the audience senses it's a warning. They recognize the neatness of the arrangement, its shrine-like quality. It isn't trash, it's an offering. These are tokens for the dead, items for a spirit to groom itself, to season its endless meal, flowers for a grave without a body. The hair, in particular, is the part of us that folklore claims keeps growing long after death. I sat on the decaying bench, which seemed to have followed me from the bus stop. That's when the sound began. Tach. A long pause. Tach. It was a clean, distinct sound, like water falling from a height onto a hard surface. This small, unsettling detail was audibly wrong. It wasn't the rhythmic, mechanical sound of a faulty faucet, but something more deliberate, more organic. The strangest part was the silence that followed. There was no corresponding splash, no plink or ripple from the reservoir's surface. Just the initial sound, and then nothing. The character ignores and rationalizes it, looking for a leaking pipe, an overhanging branch, anything. My mind strained to place it, to give it a logical source, but its origin was everywhere and nowhere at once. It was simply there, a detail that didn't fit the reality I understood, but the audience senses it's a warning. This is the turning point. The silence after the drip is louder than the sound itself, a confirmation of a presence that doesn't obey the laws of our world. Then came the weight. It was sudden, a suffocating pressure on my left shoulder, pressing down on the strap of my backpack. This small, unsettling detail was tactile and undeniable. My mind registered it as a human touch, the firm, wet grip of a hand. It was heavy, cold, and insistent. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, consumed by a primal fear of what I might see if I turned. The character ignores and rationalizes it, my brain scrambling for any other possibility. The strap just snagged. My muscles are cramping from the walk. But it didn't feel like a snag. It felt like a claim. The audience senses it's a warning, a clear escalation from auditory to physical contact. This is no longer a subtle sign. It is a breach of personal space by something unseen. I slowly, deliberately shrugged my shoulder, and the pressure vanished as quickly as it had come. That was enough. I stood up, my movements stiff and robotic. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to sprint back down the earthen path without looking back. But a more calculated part of my mind took over, whispering that running was an invitation. Running showed fear, and showing fear to a predator was a fatal mistake. So I turned and walked, forcing myself into a steady, even rhythm. I didn't look back at the black water, at the small, sad offerings on its concrete shore. I could feel its presence behind me, a cold, vast emptiness that watched my every step. The dripping sound had stopped, but its absence was now more menacing than its presence, leaving only the sound of my own frantic heartbeat in the suffocating silence. I had ignored the warnings, stacking one rationalization on top of another until a cold, wet hand had rested on my shoulder. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had been lucky to leave at all. The morning after the first drop, I found the small white towel the hanok's owner had laid over my shoes was not just damp, but cold, a deep, cellular cold that seemed to cling to the fabric long after the moisture should have evaporated. I tried to reason it away. The night air, condensation, the simple humidity of a house nestled between a mountain and the sea. But the memory of the night was too sharp, too specific. The slow, deliberate drag of heat from the ondol floor, a perfect line drawn away from my futon as if by an invisible siphon. And the smell of a wet scalp, not of clean hair, but of the skin itself, primal and unsettling, tracing a path from the paper screen door to the center of the room before fading. I spent the day trying to shake the feeling of being watched. I walked through the town, letting the noise of the market and the bright chatter of vendors scrub the silence of the hanok from my mind. But the warnings I'd received played on a loop. The women in the jjilbang, their voices low and serious over the steam. Don't bring salt from there. It remembers what it touches. And the host, her smile never quite reaching her eyes as she'd pointed toward the mountain. The path is beautiful. Don't sit. And if you walk it after dark, don't wash here. I hadn't walked the path after dark. I hadn't sat, but the rule felt broken all the same, as if by merely sleeping in proximity to the mountain, I had become a stationary object, an invitation. That evening, I approached the host, asking for another blanket under the pretense of a draft. She obliged without question, her movements efficient and smooth. "The house is old," she said, her voice a placid surface. "It breathes with the mountain." There was no hint of concern, no acknowledgement that anything could be out of the ordinary. Her dismissal was so complete, it made me feel foolish, planting a seed of doubt. Was I imagining it? Was I bringing my own city-bred anxieties into this quiet, ancient space? The second night, I left the small bathroom light on, its faint glow casting long, distorted shadows across the room. I lay awake for hours, listening to the house settle, my senses on high alert. Just as sleep began to claim me, I heard it again. Drip. This time it was followed by another. Drip. Not a leak, but a slow, rhythmic beat, like water being squeezed from a saturated cloth. Then came the cold. It was faster this time, more aggressive. I felt the warmth not just leave the floor, but get pulled directly from my quilt. A chill traced the length of my body, a tangible pressure that made the thick fabric feel as thin as paper. My breath hitched. The boundary was being breached. This was not a memory or a draft. It was a presence in the room with me. And then, the smell. Stronger. Closer. The thick, oily scent of wet scalp filled the air, so potent it felt like I could taste it. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could map its path in the dark. It didn't stop in the middle of the room this time. It moved from the door, hesitated, and then began a slow, deliberate circle around my futon. I held my breath, every muscle tensed, listening to the soft, almost inaudible squelch of something wet on the wood floor. Closer, closer, until the smell was right beside my head. The air grew heavy and cold, the pressure immense. I felt a profound, chilling certainty that if I opened my eyes, I would see it leaning over me. The presence lingered for an unendurable minute before slowly retreating, the path of its smell reversing until it faded at the door. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When the first grey light of dawn filtered through the paper screen, I sat up, drenched in a cold sweat. My eyes scanned the room, desperate for proof. Everything was in its place, except for one thing. On the low wooden table beside my futon, the small bottle of hand lotion that had been standing upright was now lying on its side. Next to it, on the dark wood, was a small, damp smear, already beginning to evaporate. It was the final, undeniable confirmation. The towel over my shoes was soaked through, heavy with the same chilling cold as the day before. My attempt to speak to the host again was met with the same impenetrable calm. I described the cold, the dripping sound, the object that had been moved. She listened patiently, then offered a simple, infuriating explanation for each. A draft from the floorboards, condensation from the kettle, a tremor from a passing truck on the distant road. She did not believe me, or rather, she chose not to. Her denial was a wall, and it left me utterly alone, trapped in a room with a truth that only I could see. As I walked away, I felt her eyes on my back, and I knew she was not looking at me, but at whatever had followed me inside. The lakekeeper's warning was a mantra of fear repeating in my mind. Don't bow your head. To bow is to let the water get closer. But defiance is a kind of foolishness, and I had returned to the water's edge that evening with a desperate need to prove him, and my own terror, wrong. The sun had bled out behind the hills, leaving the sky bruised purple and grey. The air was unnaturally still, so thick and humid it felt like breathing through a wet cloth. I stood, refusing to sit, refusing to show any sign of rest or submission. I would face this, and I would walk away on my own terms. It began subtly, as it had before, a faint, cloying scent, like river weeds in decay, quickly sharpened into the unmistakable smell of wet, unwashed hair. My stomach tightened. I focused on a single, pale petal from a lakeside flower, suspended motionless on the glassy surface of the water, a tiny point of stillness in a world that was about to break. Then came the sound. Drip. It was soft, but it landed with the weight of a stone in the suffocating silence. It was behind me, to my left. I kept my eyes locked on the petal. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. Don't bow your head. Another drop. Plink. This one was closer, right behind my right shoulder, at the level of my ear. I felt a phantom splash, a microscopic spray of cold that wasn't really there. The air grew colder, the humidity clinging to my skin, not with warmth, but with a chilling dampness that sank into my bones. The dripping stopped being singular. It became a chorus of slow, deliberate sounds from all around me, a wet orchestra tuning itself in the gloom. It sounded as if dozens of unseen, sodden things were rising around me, each shedding a single heavy drop of lake water onto the thirsty ground. My resolve began to crumble. The primal instinct to turn, to confront the source of the sound, was overwhelming. It was then that the most distinct sound yet manifested. A low, gurgling breath, as if someone was trying to speak through a throat full of water. It was directly behind me, so close I felt the vibration of it against my neck. It was a sound of agony, of lungs that had fought for air and lost. That was what broke me. In an involuntary spasm of pure terror, my body flinched, my head jerking forward in a short, sharp bow. The world plunged into an abyss of cold. In the instant my head dipped, the water of the lake seemed to surge forward, not as a wave, but as a silent, rising tide that swallowed the shore in a heartbeat. My feet were suddenly submerged in icy, black water. I looked up, and my breath was stolen from my lungs. It was standing there, risen from the depths, a figure made of dread and drowned things. The Mulgwishin was not a ghost in the ethereal sense. It was a horrifyingly physical presence. Its form was vaguely human, but swollen and distorted. Its skin the pale, wrinkled white of flesh that has been submerged for too long. Its face was a featureless bloat, with dark, hollowed pits where eyes should have been. But the hair, its hair was a living nightmare. Long, black, and tangled with slime and rotten weeds. It floated not in water, but in the air around its head, each strand moving with a slow, serpentine grace. It didn't walk on the water. It was a part of it. As it glided closer, the gurgling sound intensified, a constant, wet rattle of a final, failed breath. I was paralyzed, a statue of fear rooted to the muddy lakebed. Powerless. My mind screamed to run, but my limbs refused to obey, locked by a horror too profound to process. The water spirit raised a long, waterlogged arm. Its fingers were unnaturally long and skeletal, the skin peeling away from the bone. It didn't reach for me. Instead, its hair did. Strands of the cold, slimy hair snaked through the water like vipers, wrapping around my ankles with a grip that was both slick and impossibly strong. The pull was immediate and violent. I was yanked off my feet, falling backward into the frigid water with a gasp that was instantly choked off by the foul lake. Panic exploded in my chest. I thrashed wildly, but it was like fighting against liquid steel. The hair was a net, pulling me deeper, dragging me along the bottom. The world above became a distorted memory of fading light. My lungs burned. The gurgling sound was in my ears now, an intimate whisper of my own impending fate. This is what it wanted. Not to kill me, but to make me one of them. Another voice in the chorus of the drowned. Another apology left unheard at the bottom of the silent lake. I was going to die here. That was a close call, wasn't it? If you want to see what happens next and find out if I ever escape the grasp of the water spirit, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the terrifying conclusion. Let me know in the comments below what you would have done in this situation. Would you have been brave enough to face the lake? The escape began not with a run, but with a single, deliberate lift of a foot. My boot, heavy with mud and resolve, broke the suction of the damp earth. I walked away from the water's edge, each step a declaration of war against the thing that had almost claimed me. I did not run. To run would be to acknowledge its power, to admit that it was something to be fled from. Instead, I walked, my spine a rigid pillar, my chin held high, as if presenting my throat to a different kind of executioner. My posture was my only weapon, a fragile shield of defiance against the memory of my own surrender. The forest, which moments before had been a silent, complicit observer, burst back into life. The cacophony was deafening. The frantic chirping of unseen insects, the rustle of a small creature in the undergrowth, the sigh of the wind through the pines. It was as if a conductor had lowered a baton, and the world's sound had rushed back in to fill the terrifying void left by the entity in the water. That single, dry clap from the trees had been the signal. It had been an act of severance, a sharp, authoritative crack that shattered the hypnotic spell. She's not hers. The words, spoken by a woman I never saw, were a verdict, a release. I was no longer a potential meal, a curiosity to be dragged under. I was an object of a territorial dispute, and I had been relinquished. The thought brought no comfort, only a colder, more intricate fear. I walked until the soft, yielding ground of the shoreline gave way to the sharp crunch of dry leaves and fallen twigs. I didn't dare look back. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that to turn around would be to issue a new invitation. The weight on my shoulder was gone, but a phantom cold remained, a patch of skin that felt permanently soaked, eternally chilled. The water that had streamed down my back from my drenched hair now felt different. It was no longer a simple physical sensation. It was a memory, the ghostly touch of silver threads trying to stitch me to the water, to pull me into its dark, waiting embrace. The farther I moved, the more the physical scars of the encounter made themselves known. A deep, throbbing ache settled into my shoulder joint, a muscular memory of the impossible weight that had rested there. My knees trembled with the aftershocks of weakness, recalling how they had buckled, how close I had been to sinking to the ground and being dragged away. My hands, when I finally dared to look at them, were shaking uncontrollably. But the true wounds were not visible. They were etched onto my mind, a fresh set of rules for a world I now knew was far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. Never turn your back to the water, never listen to a sound that has no mouth, never mistake a pull for an invitation. The memory replayed itself without my permission. The subtle darkening of the water, the formation of an idea that looked like eyes, the grotesque beauty of the bubbles that formed a silent, beckoning word, and then the clap. That sound would haunt me, I knew. It was both my salvation and a terrifying reminder of my own powerlessness. I hadn't saved myself. My will, my strength, my desperate desire to live. None of it had been enough. I had been saved by a stranger's intervention, a voice from the woods that had claimed me as something other than prey. By the time I stumbled onto a recognizable trail, the last vestiges of twilight had bled from the sky, leaving a bruised, starless dark. I leaned against the rough bark of a massive oak, the solidity of it a stark contrast to the fluid, yielding nature of the water. I did not feel relief. I did not feel triumph. I felt hollowed out, scoured clean by a terror so profound it had left no room for any other emotion. This was not the clean, sharp feeling of victory. It was the ragged, gasping sensation of having barely survived. I had walked out of the water's reach, but a part of me would be forever standing at that edge, my knees buckling, my will dissolving like salt in the tide. I had escaped the place, but I would never truly leave it behind. It was a part of me now, a cold spot on my soul, a constant, quiet whisper reminding me how little separated the ground I stood on from the depths that waited to pull me down. Back in Gongdok, the oppressive weight of the haunting felt less like a presence in my apartment and more like a sickness in my own mind. I knew I couldn't banish it, but I clung to the desperate hope that I could bargain with it. There's an old piece of folklore, a half-remembered whisper from a grandmother, that says if a water spirit desires something of yours, you can offer it a new one in trade, a gesture of peace. The comb. It had to be the comb. That night, I walked to the center of Mapo Bridge, the endless streams of traffic humming a nervous city lullaby. I held up a simple, new plastic comb, its teeth sharp and clean under the orange glow of the streetlights. "This is for you," I whispered to the dark, swirling water of the Han River below. I let it go, watching it disappear into the blackness without a sound. For a few days, there was a change. The slow, rhythmic drip, drip, drip from the bathroom towel didn't stop, but it seemed to lose its previous insistence. The sound was lighter, the resulting puddle on the tiles smaller, as if the spirit was considering my offering. But the quiet was only a pause, a breath before a deeper plunge. One evening, returning late, I saw them. A trail of wet, bare footprints leading from my front door up the concrete stairwell. My blood went cold. They were perfectly formed, yet unnervingly deliberate. They ascended the first 3 steps, then completely skipped the 4th, landing squarely on the 5th, then the 6th, 7th, and skipping the 8th. Every multiple of 4 was untouched. A clean, impossible leap. The character for 4, S.A., say, is a homonym for death, say, see. This wasn't just a ghost. It was a ghost that was fluent in fear, and it was starting to speak my language. The city itself became its new canvas. A few nights later, I was waiting for the last train at El Girotriga, the platform nearly deserted. As the train screamed into the station, the world outside its windows became a frantic blur. But for a split second, the sliding doors of a single car perfectly framed the platform wall opposite me. And in that frame, I saw a face, a young woman's, her features distorted not by tears running down the glass, but by water flowing inside it. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, her eyes wide with a sorrow so deep it seemed to bend the light. The train moved on, and the image was gone, but the echo of it was seared into my brain. The haunting was no longer confined to my apartment. It was migrating, embedding itself in the urban architecture, turning the reflective surfaces of Seoul into its own private mirrors. The final piece of the puzzle arrived not as a whisper or a vision, but as the sterile buzz of a text message. It was from Professor Yoon, my old folklore mentor. They put up new fences at the university lake, cameras and signs threatening fines too. Another student went missing 2 nights ago, last seen at the PC bang near the back gate. Nobody is saying the word, but we all know. My hands trembled as I read the message. I called him immediately. His voice was weary, heavy with a resignation that went far beyond academic theory. "It's happening again," he said without needing me to ask. He finally told me the story the university had tried to bury for 30 years. Her name was Lee Eun-ji. She was a brilliant literature student in the early 90s, the top of her class, with immense pressure from her family to succeed. She lived and breathed for her studies. The week of her final examinations, she studied for 3 days straight, barely sleeping. She failed her most important exam. No one heard from her after that. Her family found her shoes placed neatly at the edge of the university lake, the one they had just installed cameras around. They dragged the lake for days, but all they ever found was a single silver comb, tangled in the reeds near the bank. It was her favourite, a gift from her mother. The university, fearing a scandal, quietly ruled it a runaway case and discouraged any further investigation. But the stories started almost immediately. Students studying late at night in the library would hear weeping. Janitors would find wet footprints leading from the lake toward the dormitories, always skipping the fourth step of any staircase. She had become a ghost story, an academic cautionary tale, a mulguishin, a water ghost, forever bound to the site of her final despair. Suddenly everything clicked into a horrifying, perfect symmetry. The water that haunted my apartment was the water from the lake, a piece of her sorrow that had followed me home. My attempt to appease her with a new comb was a fool's errand. She didn't want a replacement. She wanted the one she had lost, the last tangible link to the life she'd been forced to leave. The face in the subway glass was her face, trapped not in my memory, but in the city's, forever drowning. Professor Yoon sighed on the other end of the line. The new fences, the cameras, they think they can solve a spiritual debt with modern security, he said, his voice laced with bitterness. They don't understand. She isn't trying to scare anyone. She's just lonely. And when she finds another student at their breaking point, another soul drowning in pressure just like she was, she reaches out. I hung up the phone, the sterile beep of the disconnected line echoing in the sudden silence of my room. The missing girl from the PC bang wasn't a new victim. She was a new companion. The dripping in the bathroom suddenly sounded louder, more insistent, a mournful drumbeat counting out a debt that Seoul had long forgotten. But the water would always remember. What do you think really happened to the towel? Was it simply taken by a person in need, a final quiet act of human connection? Or did the water itself, a force heavy with memory, claim the offering to appease a lingering spirit? In Korean folklore and spiritual beliefs, water is often seen as a powerful conduit, a place where silence, sorrow, and memories can pool together. It can be a gateway for spirits, particularly the souls of those who drowned, known as mulguishin. These spirits are believed to try and pull others into their watery graves. The story's final line, "If you're not careful, your life will become a wet road back," speaks to this danger. Leaving an offering, even a small one, is an act of creating a boundary, a way to sever a spiritual tie, so you can walk away with your head held high and not be dragged back into that sorrow. This idea of respecting unseen boundaries is a powerful one. Share your own water rules or family superstitions in the comments below. Never bow, keep your head high. And if you want more true folklore from across Asia, subscribe so you don't miss the next story.